time and be respectful of everyone's time. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the June 13th Community Conversations. As you see the title on the screen, we're talking about Juneteenth. We'll talk more in detail about that federal holiday. And we have three presenters that are going to be our facilitators today. Our three facilitators are Reverend Dr. Richelle Foreman Gunter. She's the Associate Minister of St. Paul's Baptist Church, Westchester, also the Chair of the Political Action and Religious Affairs Committees, and a Executive Member for the Westchester NAACP. Reverend Dr. Lawrence Claiborne, he's the Youth Pastor at St. Paul's Baptist Church here in Westchester, and Dr. Tracey Robinson, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Westchester University. Okay, the next slide, Karen, please. Or
yeah.
Yep. We also want to make sure we give our appreciation to our sponsors. These are the folks that have provided support for us so that we can continue having these informational, educational, and enlightening conversations about education, issues, information, you name it. We cover it all on Community Conversations. So today will be a combination of all three of those, I think. Again, thanks to our sponsors. Some ground rules. Be respectful to all. I tell you what, we talk about issues that sometimes others that we're not familiar with or may not be as comfortable with. So it's great that we maintain respect and understand that we're all here to learn from our facilitators and learn from each others. We ask that when we do the video later on today, we ask that you mute yourself and also turn off your video when we do that video portion. But for now, please, if you feel so inclined to, please let us see you before we begin this process. As far as the communications portion, when we have our dialogue, open dialogue, we ask that you use the raise your hand section of your chat, or go in the chat room if you want to make a comment or pose a question. And remember, we're here to talk about issues of concern, problems, not particular people. And we ask that if you have any side conversations, please to mute yourself. Thank you. Okay. And again, we're here to discuss what sometimes is considered the undiscussable. But the only way we move forward is to have those sometimes challenging, sometimes difficult conversations, and educate one another about the real world, real life. And today we're going to talk about a real portion of American history. Okay, having said those things, our first presenter for today is Dr. Tracey Robinson. Tracey, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually in the process of hanging my yard flag for Juneteenth. It's so amazing to have it celebrated for another year as a national holiday. And so, wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about both what's going on in the country as it relates to teaching history, as well as the celebration of Juneteenth this coming year. And so in a survey of US adults just recently in 2021 to think about the Juneteenth holiday, you can see some of the data that was gathered in terms of who knew just absolutely nothing, which was over a quarter of adults surveyed, to those who knew just a little bit, and a very small portion of those who actually knew a lot about the upcoming Juneteenth holiday. And it's always interesting. I have to tell you, when I started putting my yard flag out, even to think about, how my neighbors would respond. I'm originally from North Carolina. I've been in Pennsylvania for 5 years. And so, and then I just moved in February. And so even my old neighbors to my new neighbors, thinking about how they would respond to me putting out my Juneteenth flag, if I needed to even be concerned about it. And it's 2023. You would think that a person can just bring their whole selves to their community and not worry about those kinds of things. But I think in today's climate, it's more challenging than ever. Juneteenth is a very important holiday. And I think, again, it speaks a lot to what we know and understand about our US history. And again, there's so much more to learn. Uh, for those of you who've been following conversations around what is being coined as critical race theory, which is not really critical race theory, I encourage you to really help to understand what the issue of teaching history as it truly is. What is that? What's the challenge with that? Why is it that we still face that? Um, and to go from there. So there's an African proverb that says, until the hunter has its own historian, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And so I just say that to say that I think that a lot of this is within that. So in thinking about some key terms that we'll be talking about today, as an undergraduate student, I actually minored in African American Studies. And I remember one of my classes, my professor, Joanne Woodard, she asked the question, how many enslaved African Americans did the Emancipation Proclamation free when it was issued January 1st, 1963? And I remember going out around the room and hearing many different answers given, from, thousands to, several hundred. And she kept going around the room and got all these answers, and every answer she was getting was incorrect. And I take a lot of pride, because then she called on me. I put my hand up and she said, Tracey, how many enslaved African Americans did the Emancipation Proclamation free when it was issued January 1st, 1963? And my answer was none. Because it was not the Emancipation Proclamation that actually freed people. People were still being held in bondage years after the start of the Civil War, and even after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. So it took the Civil War to actually free enslaved Africans. And that's a very important point. And, which gets us to that Juneteenth holiday, June 19, 1865, right? When people learned about their actual independence and freedom. And so to distinguish the American Civil War from the Emancipation Proclamation, from the 13th Amendment to Juneteenth holiday, is really, really important. And so I'm trying to make sure there's nothing else I want to say about that. Okay, and then we get into the Civil War, and this map is really interesting because I'm also following, of course, as a vice president for diversity, equity, inclusion at Westchester, this mapping that's going on with anti-DEI legislation, right, and teaching, right, and how it's dividing our country. And it's interesting because some states now that appear on this map to be in blue, actually, when we think about, again, a history not studied is bound to repeat itself. The importance of thinking about abolitionists and slavery. I just want to say this point, and then I'm going to go on to the next presenter. South Carolina was the first state to succeed, to issue its articles of succession. It was, for the longest time, the richest state in the country. A lot of times, if you go to South Carolina, I know many of you probably travel to South Carolina, have been to South Carolina, either Charleston or Myrtle Beach or somewhere around that area. But I encourage you to go to the Sea Islands, to look at the Gullah Geechee culture. And one of the important pieces around that is what they called, South Carolina was so rich because of its rice plantations, right? And they called their rice, a form of their rice, Carolina gold rice, right? Because it made them so wealthy. They also called enslaved Africans black gold because it made them so wealthy, right? And if people argue about what caused the Civil War, look directly at the succession documents themselves, and it tells you, if you look at South Carolina, Georgia, and Mississippi, it says specifically the first reasons, right, is to maintain the institution of slavery. And so that's really, really important. If you're trying to find reason and rationale and you don't want to go to, you know, commonplace, you know, today's ideologies, look at the actual documents that were issued with their succession. And it clearly states maintenance of the institution of slavery, how it seeks to serve that state, how in fact they think it seeks to serve those who are in bondage as well as those who are free. So with that, I will pass it on to our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. Appreciate your commentary. I tell you what, always enlightening. Dr. Claiborne.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Robinson. I just want to piggyback right off of what you said. And so when we look at the history of Juneteenth, just to add some additional context, it did go into legal written effect January 1st, 1863. And if you understand the African American church tradition, this is where we get the concept of watch night services beyond denominational distinctive Baptist, AME, and the such. We were all anticipating, African Americans were anticipating the coming of freedom, and they spent the entire night in church and in private homes waiting for the clock to go from 11:59 p.m. to 12 a.m. to usher in a new era for Black people in this country. And just like Dr. Robinson said, although we waited up, we were still waiting. And what's so interesting was when you think about the structuring of the Emancipation Proclamation, it was both an idea of freeing slaves, but it was also an idea of winning the war. It was a way to increase economic strain, because how do we continue to finance a war in the South without our main economic engine of slavery? So there were a number of pieces attached to this beyond just freeing slaves that Lincoln was attempting to execute. And so literally, if you do the math between January 1st, 1863, all the way to June 19th, 1865, it's 900 days. So there was a 900-day delay for a majority of the states in the South. And what we know about the experience in Galveston, Texas, it's a big deal. If you ever have time and want to really experience the richness of this experience, go to Galveston, Texas on Juneteenth. It is, you will never forget it. And what's so interesting is when, is somebody unmuted? Okay, wonderful. What's so interesting about this entire history is you see 2.5 years later, April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee. That's okay, don't worry, Vincent Miles, don't worry. So in 1865, April 9th, General Robert E. Lee finally gave it up. We know our history for the most part. But what is significant is when you think about what freedom means and you think about the contextualized delay that I mentioned, the 900 years, that's significant for a number of reasons. Because that means that the idea of ending slavery is one thing. The implementation of it is another. And so when we look at our history, this is a microcosm of what we experience. So when we look at this history, it's a microcosm because sometimes the ideas are the first thing to kind of, be cemented. But then the ideology and the thought systems and how it kind of works in practical sense takes time for people to make that shift. Interestingly enough, it wasn't all African American soldiers who marched into Galveston, Texas, although there were African American soldiers. It wasn't all African American soldiers. And what's so powerful is when they marched into Galveston, Texas, they read General Order. I can go to the next slide, by the way. I'm sorry. I'm on the next slide. When they marched into Galveston, Texas, they read General Order number 3 at the courthouse. And then a number of enslaved persons then left the courthouse and went to what was known as Reedy Chapel, which is now Reedy AME Church, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church. And they went from the courthouse to the church house to, thank God, praise God for freedom finally reaching Galveston. But they also went to find their relatives who had been sold to local plantations. So can you imagine that scene of not seeing loved ones and having not just the ability, but having the legal and the manpower, if you will, to now go get your family and reunite with your family. So this entire scene is so important to our history and it's been lost. But I'm glad, as Dr. Robinson said, that it's a national holiday and we can celebrate it as a collective. And so ultimately, when we look at the history and we look at the gap between, the legal mandate and the implementation of it, that speaks volumes even to today, and how we need to learn to close the gap between when something is realized and when we act on it. That's what Juneteenth from a system perspective means. And when we honor that history, we honor those who had to endure beyond that timeline. And just to bring it a little bit closer to home here up north, we have to also understand that slavery wasn't officially abolished in Delaware, the state of Delaware, until 1901. So there's some work to be done. And there's some history to make sure we don't forget so that, again, we don't repeat the same mistakes. Next slide. So what is awesome about this slide is this is a depiction of an Emancipation Day celebration or a Juneteenth celebration 35 years after the original date in 1900 in Eastwoods Park in Austin, Texas. Now, if you're not from Texas, you're not familiar, Galveston and Austin are roughly about 225 or 30 miles from each other. But they gathered there, they sang songs, they spent time together, and they even reenacted some of the events from that wonderful day. And just another piece of history, this celebration, I don't know if you can see in the little note, the photos were taken by Grace Murray Stevenson. And she was able to provide a historical timeline of that day, those events, and it was then shared in the San Francisco Chronicle to commemorate that day. So I'm going to now pass it over to Dr. Richelle Foreman Gunter to continue on government recognition.
Everyone, I'm excited to share a little bit about government recognition. Many of us are familiar. We know that when many of us began celebrating the legacy of Dr. King, there was a whole process associated with it becoming a federal holiday. And Juneteenth was no different. There were two really important individuals that I think many of us have not learned about, who really spearheaded and drove this and the importance of official holiday. And that was Al Edwards, a state legislator from Texas, and Opal Lee. And both of them played a huge role in pushing for first a state holiday in Texas, where they had been celebrating in some way since that day when they marched from the courthouse to Reedy AME Church. They had been celebrating all along, but his work allowed him to push for an official state holiday in Texas. And then the work that Opal Lee was doing, also from Texas, allowed her to, along with President Biden, to create this federal holiday. She was really in the forefront. Opal Lee remembers as a child the trauma that she went through when her parents' home was burned down because people said they chose a home in the wrong neighborhood of Texas. They safely got their children out of the house, and the police told her father, that if he defended his property, the mob that was in front of the house would be unleashed on him. So they lost their home and all of their belongings. But Opal Lee was really influenced by her father's courage. And so she began to walk all over the country in order to establish Juneteenth as a federal holiday. So we have Al Edwards, who's known as Mr. Juneteenth, and Opal Lee, who's known as the Queen of Juneteenth, who really were very important in making sure that we have this holiday that we celebrate on June 19th. Next slide. There is a Juneteenth flag that was created in 1997. And the flag really shares the importance of the holiday. The star representing Texas represents not just freedom in Texas, but for all African Americans in all 50 states. The curve represents a new horizon, what lay ahead for African Americans when emancipation and freedom is realized. The bursting outline of the star represents new beginnings, and June 19th, 1865 marks the day when those Union troops finally informed the residents of Galveston. And so that date was added to the flag in 2007. And the red, white, and blue are colors that we are familiar with and remind us that enslaved people and all of our descendants are all Americans. Next slide. In the early years, and I would say up until very recently, few African Americans participated in organized Juneteenth celebrations. Today, that's very different. And I'm excited that if you look at these pictures, there'll be some familiar faces you see locally. These are celebrations that happen right here in our community. The last year's celebration at the Milton Center and celebrations that are happening locally in our community. So we are excited to celebrate not only this event and this holiday, but to celebrate the freedoms and the achievements that come with remembering that we all have this opportunity to take advantage. This is all occurring in the backdrop for many of us of things that don't always seem like they're a step forward. And while we're talking about this from a celebratory place, I think it's really important to understand that after Juneteenth came and a real emergence in lynching, after Juneteenth, the event came real opportunities that we would never have the kinds of freedoms that include economic freedom and freedom to vote. And so we celebrate, but we also understand that we celebrate in the backdrop of we have always faced and dealt with issues that try to keep us from moving forward. And so Juneteenth today is celebrated in that same light that while we are making progress, many of us still face challenges to freedom and achievement. I think that's a wrap for me. I'll hand it back to Timmy.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Robinson, Dr. Claiborne, Dr. Foreman, thank you so much for adding your insight, your personal knowledge, your behind the scenes facts to these slides we shared. As they've stated all, this doesn't tell the whole story, but we're trying to make sure we give you the real portion of history. The history, sometimes it is missed. The history, sometimes it's omitted. So as we move forward and talk about what has happened, we're going to take a step in the present for a moment here and talk about activities that are happening starting this week here to celebrate Juneteenth. We're going to come back to some other things and have some discussion. So Please keep those questions in your mind. We're going to come back to those questions so we can talk with our facilitators. But to talk about what's happening right now for us to celebrate Juneteenth here in our community. For 2023, this is the first time that Chester County has had countywide Juneteenth celebrations. So there are 4 major areas in Chester County: Coatesville, Kennett Square, Phoenixville, and Westchester that have Juneteenth activities. These next few slides, we're going to go to these next few slides. Pause for a moment. Have you take note of some of the activities that are happening? And most importantly, I'm going to ask you to note the website on the bottom of the page, because if you go to that website, you will be able to see all these details in their entirety and even more information regarding Juneteenth celebrations. But for Westchester, here's our first slide for Westchester. You'll see the committee on the ribbon on the side of the page, and some, as has been mentioned before, some of our local community members that have been involved with planning this process for Juneteenth 23. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here's a list of activities. Activities start effective tomorrow, where we have a genealogy program where we're going to discuss about how to trace your roots. And it goes up into June 19th, where we have the Freedom Festival at the Melton Center, and all these activities in between, of course. But just take a moment and look at those, and then we'll go to the next municipality. And Lily has put in the chat the link also. For Kennett Square, okay, again, the list of 2023 Juneteenth activities, you'll probably see some familiar names on the side as you look at the ribbon and see the folks involved with the actual committee. And you see the activities taking place that actually started on Sunday and are going to conclude on June 18th. Please take a moment and look at those. And any of these activities you can participate in, we encourage you to please do so. These folks have worked hard to make sure that we recognize this federal holiday and this important part of American history.
And you know, Timmy, we have some of the planning partners on the calls, like Joan Holliday. I see you there from Southern Chester County, and there's got to be more in that team, Cheryl Miles and all. So it's been great to start to work more closely together with teams throughout Chester County.
Excellent. Definitely.
And
so
the godmother of Chester County Juneteenth is on the line. Actually, Teresa, there you are. If you want to say anything about Phoenixville, you've been doing Juneteenth for a long time in Phoenixville.
It got started a long time ago by Pam Dunn. She's one of our tributes for Black Light Projects, absolutely, and she carried it on for a while. After she passed, it kind of fell by the wayside, and then more recently, a group of us got together and said, no, we got to bring this back, and how can we do it? And we started working then collaborative team. Ooh. You know what I'm saying.
Together.
It's not working.
Together.
So the core organization is Black Light Projects, Orion Communities, and Diversity in Action. We're the group that asks other organizations to be a part of it every year and say, hey, do you want to help us plan for this year, and go from there. And it's been great so far. We've been having lots of welcomed input and ideas, and I just love the fact that we're collaborating on a larger scale, and super thrilled that it's Chester County wide. I can't even express that enough.
outstanding. Thank you so much, Teresa. You've truly led the way for us to follow. We thank you for that.
And then
Yeah.
Coatesville,
In Coatesville.
Vincent's here. Who else is here in Coatesville? Is Vincent still on?
I'm here from
I
Coatesville.
don't,
Oh,
yeah,
thank
I'm here. I don't see
just-
anyone else on the team here. But
You
So
want to?
hi, Camera from Chest Pen is also
Oh,
here.
thank you. Yep, we got a good planning committee in Coatesville that's working. Vincent and Tamara, you want to say anything about it?
I'm actually not on the committee, but I'd really like to be added for next year.
Oh, Vincent, you got another one. Good for you.
yeah, that's good stuff. I'll talk to Miss Donna about it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Chest Pen ought to be
it's pretty
involved in that.
straightforward. Absolutely.
I'll
But yeah,
put my
it's pretty
email address in the chat.
Sounds
Tamara.
good.
Vincent, you want to explain what's going on in Coatesville for Juneteenth?
Yeah, sure. So ours kicked off earlier this month on the 2nd. We had our first Friday with Second Century Alliance, which was an awesome turnout. We had a lot of people come through. We had drummers come in. We had, sorry, one of the council members, game over. I'm sorry. This is the Chester County Community conversation. Oh, hi.
But
But yeah,
action cam.
Oh, shoot. She's funny. But yeah, everything's coming together. All right, I'll be like, ha, you see? It's the screen, bro. But yeah, yeah, so we started off with Second Century. We had a first Friday. Great turnout. We had drum players come in. A lot of different historians came in to give some information to the community, which isn't on the flyer here on Friday. Just like Phoenixville, I've seen on theirs, they're having a play for the Wiz. Second Baptist here in Coatesville is gonna put on a play as well. And then, yeah, on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we're gonna have a Freedom Festival, which is partnership with the NAACP. Things are coming together for that, and I'm just excited to be a part of it all. We'll have a 2-on-2 basketball tournament, father-son, father-daughter tournament, which is going to be exciting. A lot of people in the community is excited for that. So yeah, all the information's there. You guys can see it. That's pretty much what we have going on for this year. Next year, though, is going to be super exciting. I can't wait to tell you guys more about that. We discovered a Civil War cemetery up towards East Fallowfield. So we're looking to do a lot of excavation and clearing that place up for next year and rededicating it. So super exciting stuff.
Thanks for jumping in, Vincent. I appreciate it.
And sorry for all the jumbo in the background.
You got work to do, I hear. So Timmy has been real instrumental trying to help people throughout the land get Juneteenth together. How about we jump to a 7-minute video? And then we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to Juneteenth. We have some discussion questions, and we're going to stay in the full group, I think, to really get down deep into some discussion. But let's do the video. And Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you to punch up the video and turn up the volume.
Okay, can you stop sharing your screen and I will share mine?
Okay. Good.
Juneteenth is a deeply emotional moment for enslaved people because for decades, for centuries, enslaved people prayed for, hoped for, fought for in the form of slave rebellions, running away, bought their freedom when they could. And if you read slave narratives, if you listen to spirituals from the era of slavery, you know that enslaved people longed for freedom. This was something that had been hoped for, but many believe may never come.
Well, the mortal is promised to give me $40 a month in fed. Well, lots of the boys say they ain't want it. They rather go free, you know.
Being able to go wherever they wanted, being able to wonder about. For enslaved people, it was an expression of their freedom.
Well, Matt Porter was the one that along with Miss Porter, one of our white folks in Navy. He come along, we all sitting on the fence, and the colored soldier come along and asked her, did she want to go with him? And she said, yes, she mounted one of them horses. She went on with them. I never did see her and hear tell of her no more.
When I think about Juneteenth, I think about it in the context of Emancipation Day celebrations that began January 1, 1863. They took on a whole new meaning when slavery was formally abolished after 1865. You would have had African-American veterans who fought in the Civil War be prominent in these celebrations, dressed in their military garb, speeches from enslaved people, the most prominent Black politicians singing of hymns, spirituals, discussions of registering to vote. Enslaved people celebrating in public their newfound freedom was an act of resistance. Because we have to remember, slavery came to an end after a 4 years bloody civil war. Still the bloodiest conflict in American history. Many people in the South and in the nation who did not want to see slavery abolished fought tooth and nail to block the 13th Amendment. The abolition of slavery created a huge humanitarian crisis in the South. Suddenly 4 million people have very little means to take care of themselves, to support themselves, and do so in a really hostile environment. So the military was necessary to make sure that enslaved people got the food, the medicine, the shelter that they needed in order to survive. They're also there to protect, to the extent that that was possible, freed people from violence, from recriminations, from slaveholders, from Confederates who still hadn't given up the fight.
And I remember when the Yankees stopped here, and the Yankees stopped right on the corner of Square, and the prostituting people, you know, we go to the ground team, and they take them, hang them over the slum. That's the punishment they got. Next time you see, they come a whole troop of Yankees, all riding horses. Big guns hanging on. And I said, Mama, where are they going? They're all going home now.
When the last federal troops leave the South, it's a signal to Southerners. The federal government wasn't going to put its might into ensuring the civil rights of Black people would be observed. You have 20, 30 years later, Black people being lynched in public, and there isn't a federal anti-lynching law to protect them. In most communities in America, there's a history of lynching and racial violence, and very few communities have marked that, commemorated that. Every decade since the end of slavery, Black people have been more educated, accrued more wealth, more status in American society. Every decade since 1865. But there's been one constant, and that constant is the presence of random racist violence. What I see in George Floyd's murder was a white police officer attempting to dominate and to subdue a Black man who was not resisting, who could not resist. Even though slavery came to an end in 1865, the desire to master and dominate Black bodies did not. And we have never dealt with that. These are the kinds of stark realities that are highlighted during Juneteenth. If Black people's lives can be expunged through racist violence and no one is held accountable, how free are we? Are we free?
Here, Wynn, think about this for a moment. The format we followed today thus far. We talked about our history. We had three facilitators share the history of how we got to Juneteenth. We talked about the celebratory activities that are taking place between now and June 19th. And then this video is a reminder that we've yet a ways to go, because even though some things may not be done physically and visually, as you may have seen in this video, there are issues we still have in this country. And these are community conversations. It's an opportunity for us to share, to talk, to ask questions, to try to better understand what's happened, what's happening, and how we can mold the future. So I ask you, as you think about these questions we have, the discussion questions, we have 3 esteemed facilitators that are going to help us guide this conversation. I ask that you take a look at these and think about the reason for community conversations. There are difficult conversations, but until you have the difficult conversations, you can't come up with the solutions. And so I ask you to take a moment and share with our facilitators. Our facilitators, please comment as you would, please, on some of these questions. And let's have a conversation the next 15 minutes or so and talk about what's Juneteenth all about? Where are we now? How do we get to where we need to go to?
And if you don't mind introducing yourself before you make a comment, like I'm Karen from the Community Foundation. Really like to have a full group discussion on how can we keep increasing awareness about the meaning and the history and importance of Juneteenth. How do we make sure it becomes more than a moment and it becomes a call to action? Let's start there, because there's so many big challenges that we have to keep going.
So while we're marking, I'll jump in. So while we're marking Juneteenth as an event, I think it's important to understand what was happening in those 900 days. As Dr. Claiborne pointed out, there were things that were happening. It wasn't day 1 and then day 900. It was sort of that underground ability to communicate information, to figure out what it is that we could do. It was everywhere that Union soldiers went, that they delivered and enforced emancipation. And that's really important. They didn't just inform by virtue of the fact that they were soldiers with the responsibility of defending the emancipation. They were also enforcing the freedom and communicating the message and helping people to begin to understand that emancipation wasn't going away and things would have to be different. And I think that when we begin to raise our awareness of what took place, the history, then we begin to understand the importance of the conversation, the importance of telling our story and sharing our story, because it helps us arrive at where we're going together. So I know it's hard to both relive. For some of us, it's traumatizing, but to relive and to retell become more important than ever.
I'm happy to jump in and talk a little bit about like increasing the awareness and the meaning of the history and the importance. Having taught African American studies for over 15 years at the collegiate level, right? And understanding what college students even know and understand about African American history. Like, we're doing our children such a disservice. And so you can't talk about African American history without addressing like the myths and the fallacies. And so, you know, and so we have to think about a curriculum that we ensure that all children are taught. And it's not to take anything away, right, from this idea, but because what gets pushed out is this idea of heroicism, right? That, you know, and its association with whiteness. And so I just want to ask a question. Who here has ever heard of Eli Whitney? Okay. And Eli Whitney is famous for what?
Cotton gin.
Cotton gin. So what did he do? Like, what do you mean the cotton gin? So he did what?
Put slaves out of work.
Okay, he put slaves out of work.
No, he didn't. He increased the production of cotton and cotton goods so that it called for much more African-American slaves to be brought in to pick more cotton. I mean, it ramped up slavery.
Who's saying that? Who knows this?
That's Thomas Wilcox. So
thank you, Thomas.
So when we talk about the cotton gin, right? Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. Eli Whitney was born where and raised where? In Massachusetts.
North.
Manufacturing nails. What does he know about cotton and the separation of seed from cotton? Yet we are many times taught about the institution of slavery, right? And if I was enslaved, I would have to pick my weight every day. Pick my weight in cotton every single day. And which included when you pick cotton, you separate the seed. If any of you have ever gone to the South or anywhere and pick cotton, you know that your hands get messed up. And so, but through African tradition, we know, right, of this tale of Sam in South Carolina. And Eli Whitney went to visit classmates and who lived and were raised in South Carolina, came upon this young man who, in helping his grandmother, right, separate seed, created this comb, a way of separating the seed from the cotton. What would Eli Whitney know about separating seed from cotton? Where did he learn this idea, right? But could Sam file a patent? Heck no. Because Sam's great. No. So don't get me wrong. Eli Whitney filed a patent, right, for the cotton gin, which in his idea and into what we think, you know, was a way to reduce, right? Some of the narratives say reduce slave labor, you know, but we heroicize Eli Whitney for the cotton gin when we don't even learn history in ways that make sense, you know, that makes sense. And so, you know, we must read and understand our history from multiple perspectives. That is so important. That is so important. And the fact that we are waiting until students are in college and those who are fortunate enough to major or minor in African American studies to even know these things is a disservice to all of and that's why we find ourselves where we are today. So I just say, you know, this should be a celebration of history in its form of looking at true perspective. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you.
Stay on it, Tracey.
Joan, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you both for your comments. I totally agree with you, Tracey, that education is one bottom line for all Americans, you know, and we're not getting that. So that's promotion for that. I'm intrigued by the question of what is, the last question was, how do Juneteenth and July 4th relate to each other? I think that's one of our issues. We compartmentalize those two holidays. We should be actually representing, it's what Reverend Dr. Lawrence said, there's the idea, and then there's the actualization of it, which takes years and years to actualize. We need to bring more awareness to that idea. We have an ideal, but it really wasn't lived out till Juneteenth and then not lived out, you know? So how do we bring that awareness rather than, you know, we're an American country with an ideal from the Constitution and we, you know, freed slaves. Those are the two separate holidays that we don't bring connection to at all, you know? So I really feel like that's what we're missing. And I don't know the answer to it, but I think that is something I certainly am trying to promote more, that we need to understand both holidays and see the connection. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joan. Teresa.
Thank you. I'm Teresa Thornton with Blacklight Projects. We document and highlight local history makers and notables here in Phoenixville. And to continue on with Dr. Robinson's point about the need for education, we take the viewpoint of educating from a local perspective so that the students and the community can start to see that your neighbors have been history makers. Now, obviously, we can't take on the entire situation as we are all discussing here, but I think if we can just start in smaller areas, and then those areas will come to combine, and eventually, hopefully sooner than later, we will make the progress that we're actually looking for. But everybody has an opportunity to attack these problems and situations in their own way. And Blacklight Projects is just doing it from a local perspective and trying to progress outwards. And I'm just saying that because that was an easy way for us to get into the school districts, into the high school for the Black History programs, and because where everything is focused on local. And, and our things can be, well, ask your neighbor. Your neighbor is a history maker. Find out about that person. And hopefully that will inspire folks to want to learn more about African-American history and the true history of the African-American people.
Thank you, Teresa.
If I could just circle back to Joan's comment. Thank you for sharing that insight. It made me think of something. I think oftentimes when we think about connecting things, it's really hard to deal with tension. And many of us avoid tension. So rather than it being either or, the tension says, how do we celebrate both and? How do we celebrate liberation for one group without that group losing anything? And how do we celebrate liberation for another group without that group losing anything? And sometimes we do comparative suffering or comparative liberation. And I think the goal here is to say that liberation needs to be acknowledged, accepted, and appreciated no matter who's being freed. And I think that's where we can kind of create that connection and say that, look, it's not either or, it's both and. And that's what we need to kind of deal with, that tension of no one's liberation is any better than anybody else's. No one's struggle is any, let's not get into comparative suffering in the sense of July 4th doesn't have value, Juneteenth does, and vice versa. I think they both have value if we take, as Dr. Robinson said, the right perspective, the true perspective, and deal with the tension of that. That while July 4th is freedom for some, it wasn't freedom for all. But yet we can still celebrate that Juneteenth was freedom for those who were waiting to finally realize that so many years later. It's both and.
Very well
I'm done.
said. Thank you. Very well said.
Yeah.
The reconciling force is liberation, period. And all of us want that. So how do we all work for that ongoingly?
Right.
Thank you. VA Barbrani. I'm looking at your name. It says VA Bob Ryan. You have a comment? Your hand is up.
It's Virginia.
All right. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was just trying to unmute. I'm using my phone instead of my
All right,
iPad.
Virginia.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm Virginia Barbarin, and I teach in the Downingtown area school district. I previously taught in the Coatesville area school district, but I just wanted to, just make note of the fact that when Africans came here, they were not slaves, they were enslaved. And, we should continue to refer to them respectfully that way, as enslaved people and not slaves. When we do celebrate Juneteenth, that was just my teacher information piece. But when we do celebrate Juneteenth, there is an economic faction of that. And that's the piece that really gets to allow people that will make money off of this unfortunate series of history And obviously the celebration that we now have with celebrating Juneteenth as a national holiday. I'm looking at who is to benefit economically from this. And when they do benefit, will that, funding go to help some of these poor and, indigent communities and help to inform and educate people more on Juneteenth, because we are certainly talking about it being a national holiday and be more of a movement than a moment. But, we know logically that within our communities now, we're talking about not educating our students. We can celebrate Juneteenth, but we can't teach about it. We can celebrate Eli Whitney, but we can't talk about the fact that he created the cotton gin based on, the enslavement and the abuse and, free labor of Africans. So how do we go about making some of these more momentous occasions, like the young lady had mentioned before, more of a movement instead of just a moment, because we're dealing with it actually starting tomorrow night. Well, tomorrow night we have an issue that we're raising with the school board in Westchester already. Thank you.
Virginia, thank you so much for your comments. Much appreciated. Anyone else want to make comments, want to share? Anthony?
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of, I mean, when I was in school, especially in elementary school, middle school, high school, we never learned. I mean, it was a very, white toast teaching of history. Excuse me. And it just seems like there was, nowadays, every time I read in the news, there's these school board meetings where folks are starting to get really up in arms about critical race theory, but when they're asked what it is, they can't really define it. And there's been a pretty successful nationwide movement to get on school boards. Here in the Oxford district, there's an issue with some school board members, and kind of control the narrative in that way. And I think to answer the question of like, how do we educate kids more about this, and how do we educate people about it? Honestly, I think it does have to start with making sure that there's curriculum. And I don't know if that starts with school boards, but going to a school board meeting saying, hey, this needs to be I'm a community member, this needs to be something that's taught to the kids. And then also book manufacturers and companies like, I can't remember their name, out of McGraw-Hill is one of them in Texas. A lot of times there's a lot of politics that go into how textbooks are written and what information goes in a textbook, what information doesn't go in a textbook. There's a lot of politics that go into that. So it goes deeper than just even our own communities, but up to that level of the companies that are selling those textbooks, the companies that are producing those textbooks and those curriculums that then get given to high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. So getting that type of information, not just, hey, here's Eli Whitney, but here's also, what are the after effects of this? July 4th was freedom for some, but not freedom for all. Like making sure that those types of topics are discussion topics in textbooks is really important.
Thank you, Anthony. Mm-hmm. I tell you what, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Any other comments at this point?
May I make a quick one?
Please, Janet, please.
I'm Janet Lawrence from Phoenixville. Anthony just reminds me that my job for the summer, and maybe everybody's, is to knock on doors of independents who didn't vote in the primary and have no idea what's going on, and explain to them school board elections.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point, Janet. Excellent. Jen, there's a common phrase that is used as each one teach one, and we take that becomes actionable for every one of us to make sure that those who did not participate for whatever reason in today's call, when you have an opportunity to share with them what you picked up from this call. Very informational, very impactful, and there are many action steps we can still follow. Both Virginia and Anthony mentioned the school board issue on tap tonight at here in Westchester Area School District. And it's one of those cases where if you don't show up, you can't control the narrative, and you've got to be involved. So we encourage everyone to do that. We've talked about the history of Juneteenth. We've talked about the activities that are taking place in our 4 municipalities in Chester County. And we thank all those who put those programs together. We talked about the history. We've had some brief discussion as to what are the next steps? What is the ask? And so I ask that each one of you to keep all that in mind as you go forward. Think about what we learned. Think about what we're planning on doing to celebrate. And most importantly, think about how you personally can make an impact. Even one person you can make an impact with. And that gets us more stepping in the right direction. We thank you so much for your attention today, and have a good week.
Thank you, you
Thank
too.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.